Good evening, everyone. Welcome you to the webinar series conducted by the Department of Tourism Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. So today's topic on the free webinar that we are going to conduct is the emerging dynamic tourism paths towards the sustainable new normal. You know what? We have already conducted 7 webinars previously as well. On the themes of learn from the industry intellects. So I'm not going to discuss about the depth aspects, but if you can visit our official YouTube channel of the department, Tourism in Paradise, you can witness all the webinars conducted by us. So first of all, before starting the session, I would like to introduce the ground rules. All attendees should be mute and they have to close their the video window, and also you can ask the questions. It is free to ask the questions, but you have to submit your question to the chat toolbox. Then the facilitators and the moderators can select the question and ask from the resource person. So it would be very grateful, you know, at any moment, even during the session, as well as we have programmed a Q&A session at the latter part of the discussion, so you can both of the time, at any time, actually, you can submit your question to the chat box, and also you are not permitted to the record. But don't worry, all the video of the session will be uploaded from the Tourism in Paradise official YouTube channel. As I told you earlier, you can visit to our Tourism in Paradise YouTube channel, and you can witness our previous webinars as well. So for getting more notification about what we are going to do and what we have planned to do, so you can basically subscribe to our channel by clicking on the bell icon. So quickly come to introduce the panelists today. First of all, we have Professor Dallen Timothy, the Senior Sustainable Scientist and Professor in Tourism from Arizona State University, USA. And Mr. Hiran Cooray, the President, National Tourism Task Force, as well as the Chairman, Jetwing Symphony, which means the Jetwing Travels and the Jetwing Hotel chain in Sri Lanka. And Professor A Lew, Chief Editor, Journal of Tourism Geography, as well as the Professor in Northern Arizona University, USA. So without taking much time, you know that I know for sure that this 2 hours will be flying so fast. So without taking much time, I would like to introduce the moderator of the session, my teacher, my lecturer, Professor MSM Aslam, Professor in Tourism, Department of Tourism Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. So Professor Aslam, so I would like to hand over the session for you to continue.
You're muted, Aslam.
Right. Thank you very much, Hiran, for getting this opportunity to have a global platform to discuss the very vital the topics today. I think this is a timely discussion what you needed by the world. Actually, today I think proud to meet with 2 tourism geniuses in the world. I think who have contributed a lot in the world, not only in their landscapes, even away from their continent, and they have moved all around the world. Especially, I would like to introduce Dallen Timothy, as one of the senior sustainable scientists, and he has contributed a lot of research and publication. Not only research and publication, he's the chief editor of Journal of Heritage Tourism, and he has traveled, I think, almost, if I'm not wrong, more than 90% of the world, right? All 4 corners of the world he has already traveled, and he's a very busy person. And again, I like to introduce our one of the leaders in our national nation, tourism leader, is Mr. Hiran Cooray, who is the chairman of Jetwing Symphony and having a large number of chain hotels and resorts and in Sri Lanka, and he's been taken over the responsibility to lead the tourism as the president of National Tourism Task Force. So very proud to introduce. Then our next resource person again from USA, Professor A Lew. He's a Professor Emeritus. He also, you know, more or less similar or above Dallen, Professor Dallen. He also has contributed a lot, and he's the chief editor of Tours and Geography, one of the top tier leading journal in the world. And he also has contributed a lot in the globe for the sustainable tourism development. So their contribution, you know, I don't have enough time to describe their contribution and their effort to bring the sustainable, you know, world towards the sustainable track. So they have done a lot, and both of them have visited Sri Lanka, especially, and they have a little bit of experience also in Sri Lanka with our tourism industry. So I'm very proud to introduce all three our the panelists and resource person, who are the, I think, right people to discuss at the these, you know, vital titles, because both the, you know, we are today going to do one important thing, that is we are going to bridge the knowledge and practice. So Hiran is fully from practical world, and Dallen and Alan will be from the full of knowledge plus the research and publications. So we try to bridge the world towards the new normal through the sustainable, you know, brainstorming and discussion session. So I'd like to, rather than, you know, hang around the time, I like to move to our discussion. First of all, I like to, turn towards Professor Dallen. You know, some or other we have gone through this pandemic and outbreak, a global pandemic and this outbreak. But whether we liked it or not, the world had to undergo. But today we are in a point to think about the future, because the last 2-3 decades, continuously the world had a large number of sessions and forum, publication, researchers on the sustainable development. Today we have got, after pandemic, we have got a very big question: will the world continue with the same old unconventional, traditional or unsustainable practices, or world will move towards the sustainable practices? So regarding this, how, Dallen, the world will accept this new normal with the sustainable tourism, what we discussed for last few decades on the world, we are to move. So, and we all know, although we had a number of discussions, we could not even move toward the sustainable in the 1% in the world. So how do you think the new normal, how the world will respond with the sustainable or responsible tourism to bring forth to the world?
Thank you, Professor Aslam. It's really nice to be here with everyone this morning. It's nice to be in Sri Lanka again. I wish I was really there, but hopefully we will be able to normalize in the future and resume our travel again eventually. And thank you to Professor Lew and Mr. Cooray and to Hiran Danusha as well for being here and for assisting with this. It's a great honor to be here. You've raised a lot of questions, Professor Aslam, about a lot of issues that are really hard to address. And I think that the title here that we're talking with also this sort of this new normal. What does the new normal look like? And what will the new normal look like in the future? And of course, we don't really know what that's going to be exactly, because we don't even know what the new normal is before the pandemic. What did normal mean before the pandemic? But and none of us can predict the future. However, there are some signs and indications that seem to point towards having, my hope is that travelers and destinations and industry representatives will have a higher level of awareness, that we will be a little bit more sensitive to other people, that we will be a little bit more aware of environments and the needs of destinations. And so I think that this crisis is giving us an opportunity to reflect. And I think if we ever get back to the way it was before, and some people have asked me before, do you think we'll ever go back to the way it was before? And part of me thinks, yes, I hope so. And then the other part of me says, I hope not, because, obviously we know that tourism has both positive and negative outcomes. And hopefully we're learning from this experience to be a little bit more sensitive and to be a little bit more aware of the world around us. I think if it ever gets back to the way it was before, it's going to take many years. I think that this pandemic has set us back a lot. But I believe that maybe being a little bit more responsible, both as travelers, as hosts, as well as facilitators, industry stakeholders, as well, being a little bit more responsible in our behaviors, in our awareness of what's going on. I think that the new normal, and I don't know for sure how it's going to be in Sri Lanka, but here in the United States, we're starting to see the new normal in the short term. And actually, my university, my department did a focus group study a couple of weeks ago, and a scenario planning exercise with industry leaders, as well as medical personnel and epidemiologists. And we saw an interesting pattern as we brainstormed and tried to figure out what the future might look like in terms of a recovery period. And really, we saw there were some industry representatives on this panel who were very interesting and talked about how they're starting to see people are tired of being locked up in their homes for 3 months. And so they're wanting to get out, and they're itching or they're desiring to get out and be in nature and to visit places. But we're starting to see a lot of very local tourism. We're starting to see a lot of people who are traveling to the mountains to go camping or to spend time in nature near their homes. And so certain sorts of if you look at camping, I suppose, as part of the lodging sector, the accommodation sector, we're starting to see this huge increase of people using nature trails, using camping areas, for example. And so we're starting to see people are still a little bit fearful about using hotels and commercial places to stay. And so we're starting to see more natural areas receive more tourists in the short term. I think obviously the hardest, from my understanding, the hardest hit sectors of tourism, really besides the lodging sector itself, but in terms of types of tourism, I think the hardest hit from this pandemic has been the cruise sector, obviously, is one, and then also medical tourism. And as I've been doing some research on medical tourism in the last 5 years, understanding sort of the global dynamics and the push and the pull and the motivations, et cetera, and how certain places are developing as medical tourism destinations or health tourism destinations. This has basically come to a complete stop. Much of medical tourism is what we call not volunteer, what's the word I'm looking at? Non-essential. For example, surgeries for weight loss or fertility treatments and things like that. And so these sorts of things that aren't emergency surgeries, in the United States at least, are being canceled. And I know they are in a lot of other places as well. We've been doing some work on the border of US-Mexico, looking at how Americans and Canadians in particular travel to Mexico for medical treatment. And that sector has completely shut down because, first of all, the US-Mexico border is now closed. But second of all, also the medical treatment, the unnecessary treatments are being stopped. And so medical tourism is one of these sectors that a lot of places are beginning to depend on for their tourism industries, but it's really hard hit. And obviously that's going to take a long time to recover, if it does at all in the long term. And of course the cruise sector. So I think we're going to start to see a reorientation of people's priorities. Certain types of tourism or certain sectors within tourism are definitely going to reduce. But some of the other things, and I know I'm running short on time, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of other things. We're also starting to see now this process of what's referred to as recovery marketing. And so whenever there is a disaster or a crisis, destinations typically have to undergo what's called recovery marketing. And we're starting to see a lot of places now focusing on this recovery. Not just the industries and the sectors, such as the airline sector or the hotel sector, but also the destinations. Here in Arizona, where Professor Lew and I both live, I've seen TV commercials that are basically, they're tourism promotion commercials, let's say from Las Vegas. And it's very interesting, their approach. They say, Las Vegas, please don't come now because we're closed. But come back in the future because we'll still be here and we'll be waiting for you. So this is kind of a very unique approach to recovery marketing or bridge marketing, where they're trying to say, look, we're closed now for tourism, but maybe next year we'll be open. So begin to, start planning to come here on your vacation next year. So we're starting to see a new approach in marketing as well. And we don't know what the long-term implications of that are, but I've seen it for many different places in the United States. I've seen print ads and online ads for various different countries in the world that are taking a very similar approach to sort of saying, look, don't come now, but keep us in mind, remember us for next year. And so it's kind of a unique approach that I think that even marketing is being very adaptable. And I think that's going to have some ripple effects into the future as well. I think that's been about 10 minutes, Professor Aslam. I can go ahead and pass over back to you. I have more thoughts on that, by the way, but I'll share those later, maybe.
It's wonderful explanation. I think our participants also could have understood very clearly about the explanation what you gave about the new normal situation. Obviously, we may not aware of new normal, what is going to be, but the time has provided us for us to get ready. So we have to prepare ourselves. That is the most important factor according to your information. Very wonderful statement you gave. I think according to your statement, the explanation, maybe world is getting back to the, primary, like oldest oriented tourism with the purpose oriented tourism. So as you explained, right? People wanted to go back to the nature, see some sort of a primary things what they have missed in the past life with the materialism. And the wonderful tagline you gave, please don't come a bit later. The same thing, I think Hiran also will agree with me, even Sri Lanka will do the same thing, right? We always say to our, because, because of the Sri Lanka is one of the, hotspot destination in the Asian region, in South Asia. So we also give the same message. So I think I like to turn towards Hiran. Hiran, I think hotel industry is the major component of the tourism value chain or supply chains. And today, I think due to the pandemic, highly suffered and almost like a victimized component of the supply chain is the hotel industry. Now I'm not ready to talk about the impact or the hardship you all have gone through, but I like to see how would you anticipate emerging or the new normal tourism with the sustainable manner, how the hotel industry would anticipate the future scenario. And especially, considering as a developing destination and emerging destination like in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Professor Aslam, and thank you for inviting me also to be in this, panel with all the professors. I'm the only odd one out, I guess. Anyway, it's a certain privilege. It's a great privilege for me to be part of it. And thanks again for inviting me, and also to Hiran, my namesake. Um, you know, I we always hear this word new normal, and I'm glad that Professor Dallen also mentioned that a lot of people are sometimes now waiting to get back to their normal life. They don't want to be talking about a new normal, but they want to go back to whatever they were doing before. So that's been one of the key factors that we've been also monitoring. How are our people behaving? At the moment, we can only judge how Sri Lankans are behaving, because we have no foreign visitors in our country since end of March, other than a few who have remained in our island. Then we of course watch international news and read international newspapers like New York Times and London Times and so on. So we gather a little bit more in detail of people's behavior. And one example I can give is what's happening in the UK, for example. UK also is similar to the US. There's a huge lockdown, and people, were saying, look, they don't want to be locked in all these times. Something similar to what Professor mentioned earlier as well. So now the government kind of, due to the pressure that people put on the government, from 4th of July, they are allowing the Brits to go to Spain, Italy, France, and few of the other countries. So very soon, it's as long as we as a nation are comfortable inviting tourists in, I'm sure we are going to see tourism kick off. Many said it'll take 2 years, 3 years. But again, as Dallen said, one thing we know for sure is we are not sure when that's going to happen. But people are definitely going to travel. Tourism is a thing that people love. Because all what's happening now, with all the marketing, with all the promotion, with all the activities that is happening on the internet and so on, you get tempted a lot more than before to travel. So therefore, I think people will travel. It is a question of when our borders will be open. We believe it will be towards end of August, September. Once these restrictions are removed, because at the moment there are lots of restrictions. Rules, testing and all of that. And I don't think many people will travel. But once those restrictions are removed, we can expect people to travel. As to whether we'll go back to our old habits of as Dallen himself said, there are good and the bad of tourism. And what I think will happen, this is my view from the business side, people's performance is judged today purely on monetary terms, on economic terms, on revenue, right? How you ask somebody, how are you doing? They'll say, I have high occupancy and my income is good. They will not tell you, look, I am doing this, I am doing, I have employed so many people from the local communities, I have given you so many jobs to the local communities, involve them in activities, then I have done so much for the environment. Nobody gives you any credit on the balance sheet for that, right? So I am lucky because my father started the company, and I can do things where I know even if it's a failure, I won't lose my job, right? But if I was a CEO working for a large corporate body, right, and my performance is going to be judged purely on the financial returns, I'm not going to be thinking very much long term, right? We are going through a massive crisis now. We are literally down to zero turnover. Suddenly, when it opens up, how will my bosses look at, how's your turnover? What have you done? You know, how much money have you earned? So then I will be looking for quick returns. I'm not then thinking of what is best for our national parks, what is best for our cultural sites, how must we limit the number of people traveling to these places. These are things that I think this has given us a lot of time. This is what I call a hibernation period, or we are in retreat. So this is a time for us to work with the universities where there's a lot of research happening, then with the governmental authorities, maybe Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Wildlife, Environment, Coastal Conservation, all these things. Then there has to be think tanks and work on a strategy. How are we going to make our national parks, how are we going to manage visitor movement there? How are we going to enhance the experience of visiting our cultural sites? These are the things that we should be doing now, so that when tourism kicks off, it's already there. You know, otherwise what's going to happen is we are going to go back to our old normal. You know, hordes of people are going to go run into the national parks, run into the cultural sites. Same normal is going to happen. There won't be any new normal as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much, Hiran. Wonderful, wonderful, the words we got from you. The first thing I understood, as long as human exists in the world, tourism never die.
Absolutely not, yeah.
So another important thing is people have learned a big lesson to come out of their materialistic, economic-oriented life to the broader social and the real world. With the, all the other contribution and the interaction with the society, people, environment, nature and all. And very valuable point at last, you inserted, integrated development. We need to have integration with the industry, university, stakeholders all, to ensure the sustainability of all our natural and cultural resources. Thank you very much for this wonderful statement. So I think your stopping point is going to be starting point of Professor A Lew. Because, Professor A Lew, I think, most importantly, what I wanted to ask, the significantly, but very precisely said, world demands a sustainable development. The sustainable development emphasizes the planned tourism development. But for whole last, many decades, this is what were missing in the world. Many countries still, they understood the importance of the planned development to reach the sustainable development, sustainability. They could not. So they were, traditionally practicing the conventional tourism and unsustainable tourism practices. So which caused a lot of, damages and overwhelming the negative impacts of tourism to the world. So how would you think, would the world will continue the same old unsustainable practices, or will they move to the planned tourism? Then how would they move towards the planned tourism? I think you would be the ideal person to respond to this issue.
Well, thank you, Aslam, and thanks everyone for being here and for inviting me to this. So I have my own thoughts on sustainable development and the reason why it hasn't really worked in the past and why it maybe will work in the future. Really, in the past, basically, you had these institutions that said, we need to do this. United Nations, we need to be sustainable in this way. We need to take care of these poor people. We need to save the environment and whatever. But it never really worked. Sustainability basically has failed, the whole model of sustainable development. And that's because, in my opinion, the reason is because we don't have people, in order for sustainability to work, it has to be part of the consciousness of every individual on the planet. Everyone you have to live sustainability. It has to be something that you accept as the normal. And sustainability has never been the normal in the past. There are many people who would like it to be the normal, but it's been far and away not the normal on this planet. This is one of the things that perhaps this COVID-19 pandemic is enabling. It is forcing people to stay home. It is forcing them to not travel. And as they do that, a number of things come up. They become a little bit, some, maybe not all, become a little bit more introspective and maybe a little bit more aware of their role in the planet, on the planet, and the impacts that they have in the things that they do. That's the kind of consciousness awareness that needs to be embedded in every person on this planet for sustainability to be successful. They've also been able to see how places have changed without so many tourists in them. I live in a big tourist destination. Every summer we're inundated with tourists. And we're still having tourists now, but it's kind of nice that we don't have, you know, the masses of tourists that we typically have in the summer this year. And so people see that. They see environments getting better. They see their local communities in some ways being reclaimed if they live in big tourist destinations. And so there's a lot of that kind of experience, I think, is helping to evolve human consciousness, helping to evolve human awareness to make them more actually aligned with the goals of sustainability. So I believe that sustainability in the long run is going to be the winner out of all of this. And that we will see people more aware in their personal behavior of how they can contribute to sustainability, which will then allow institutions and governments to impose more sustainability policies. Because if the people don't support it, it's not going to happen. If it's not part of the collective consciousness of the globe, of a country, it's not going to happen. No matter how much leaders may talk about it in different sectors. So I think that's a benefit. However, I don't think it's going to happen right away. It's going to be a process. It's going to take a little while. I mean, I live where I live here, there's an Airbnb right across the street. And another friend of mine just a couple blocks away also has an Airbnb. They are full, completely full this summer. Every night they have people in those Airbnbs. Because as you know, as both the Hiran and Dallen have said, people want to travel. You know, there is that desire to get out, to get away, from feeling cooped up. I actually think we're looking at two different groups. The market has bifurcated in a really big way because of what's happened. We have this one group of people who are just crazy to get out. They're going to as soon as bars and restaurants open, they're going there. They're going to these places. As soon as there's an opportunity, they want to go back to that normal that they knew before. But then there's other people who are not willing to do that, like myself. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. I'm very happy staying at home. I'm really enjoying staying at home. I meditate like 1 to 2 hours a day, and I'm doing yoga and all kinds of things that I'm really enjoying. So, I think you're going to have that kind of a split. One of the challenges is this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, is taking its time to go away. The state of Arizona, our governor just announced the second lockdown. All the bars were open for a couple of weeks, and now they're all closed again because of the sudden new rise in cases. This is going to take, I think this is going to last quite a while. We're going to just see, it's just not going to want to go away, and we're going to keep having to clamp things down. Every time you clamp things down, that consciousness, that awareness of a more sustainability approach is going to get a little bit more embedded. In fact, I think even after COVID-19 is managed in some way, if that's possible, we're going to see more. COVID-19 is a result of globalization. It is a result of time-space compression. It's because the planet has gotten so small, we've had such a huge impact on the natural environment. We're going to see more COVID-19s in the future. That's why I think sustainability is actually going to be the winner in the long run. And so places that are willing and able to move in that direction, I think in the long run, that's going to be the direction that the whole planet is going to be moving in. Maybe I'm a little optimistic in all of this, but that's what I think is going to happen. What that new normal is going to look like, who knows? I don't think we can tell right now what travel and tourism is going to look like. People are still going to want to travel, but how are they going to do it in 5 years from now? It will not be the way it was before. But what it's going to look like, I don't know. This is a period for innovation, for creativity, for people to come up with new ideas. And I think in terms of planning, community development planning, I think the best rule of thumb actually comes out of Buddhism and Hinduism. It's the whole concept of be here now. Deal with what you have now. What the resources you have now, the things you have to build upon now, the opportunities you have now, those are the things that people should be focusing on. Because that is what's going to take them into the future. As new things open up, new ideas, new concepts that we're not even thinking about. There was an article recently on isolation tourism is the new tourism. People wanting to be as isolated as possible. I don't know about that, but I think it's probably would be a form of maybe a high-end luxury tourism in some ways. But anyway, so that's how I answer that question on sustainability and planning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan, because that's one of the important point what you mentioned. For the last 200, 300 years, the world was moving towards always this sort of consumeristic or a materialistic life, and we always forget about the contented life and the satisfactory life, as you explained, right? And even in the tourism industry also, we made it more and more complex industry rather than simplifying. Because as you said, simplicity is the sustainability, right? It's a very simple definition. If you give the sustainability definition, is the simplicity. So I think the world may be taking the turn towards that. As you said, people may search for the meditational tourism or health tourism or nature tourism or some sort of possibly done. I think from that point, I like to move towards again to the Dallen. Dallen, now, I think with the Alan's discussion, one point I understood, the world may be moving towards from a large number mass scale tourism to the small number individual tourism. That could be possible because already even before this pandemic, we could see a global trends. Shifting from the large group to the small group, and something before, even we were talking about the solo female travels. Even the women like to travel individually, alone. So that may demand some sort of even a special interest tourism. People may not going for stereotype tourism. People may expecting a different type of experience and novelty and some sort of cultural experience and all. So how do you think in the, Prof, when we move towards, say, for example, the next, post-pandemic situation or after this pandemic, how the world will turn toward this alternative or a special interest tourism?
Well, that's a really good question, Aslam. And it takes some time to think through that. But I think the discussion so far with Hiran and Alan, I think it's very, they really raised some really important points. And I agree with everything that they've both said. I think in this pandemic era and this post-pandemic era, as we mentioned before, our hope is that people will be more aware. People will be more intentional in their behaviors, and that they will be more inclined to desire more sustainable forms of travel. Because I also agree that people will want to travel for as long as there are people on this earth. And getting to your specific question about niche forms of tourism, the hope, I think, is that the mass tourism that we've seen develop since the mid-1900s and the over-tourism that we've seen really descending on certain places that just get too many tourists, hopefully this awareness that will come from this pandemic, this crisis, might, again, as Alan mentioned, if it becomes part of people's psyche, it becomes part of people's new normal behavior, then hopefully mass tourism will diminish a little bit. Now, in saying that, I have to clarify a couple of things, because I think mass tourism, if tourism recovers the way we hope it will, I don't think mass tourism is going to disappear. There's always a lot of people, billions of people, who want to visit the Great Wall of China, or the temples of Sri Lanka, or whatever. And so you're always going to have mass tourism. But as you mentioned, in the past, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've really seen a lot of this specialization in tourism, where people are becoming a little bit less desirable to see all the major attractions in the world. I mean, everybody wants to go see the Eiffel Tower in Paris or the Colosseum in Rome, but beyond that, people are starting to say, I have a special interest in maybe old religious structures, or I have a special interest in some ethnic group or some indigenous group, or I have some kind of special interest in tea tourism in Sri Lanka, for example. And so people are starting to really think about how they can satisfy their individual curiosities or their individual interests. So we do see the breaking down of mass tourism into smaller niches that aren't as massive as mass tourism. However, I have a feeling that post-crisis mode will also increase this desire for experiencing deeper, more meaningful experiences on a sort of a niche tourism level. However, we run into the danger with that of having mass alternative tourism or mass niche tourism. And so there is a danger that even special forms of tourism or unique forms of tourism become massified or become these huge mass tourism sorts of exercises. And so I don't know that niche tourism or specialized tourism or alternative tourism is the only answer, because we know that ecotourism, which originated as an alternative form of tourism, is now mass ecotourism. And so we have to be careful in how we conceptualize this. But I think after this crisis, it seems to me, and I would hope, that this part of this growing awareness, and Hiran mentioned it and Alan mentioned it as well, this idea that we need to readjust our thinking about our priorities, our travel priorities, etc., and adopt this sort of sustainability paradigm in our own lives, that we will move more towards specialized forms of tourism. But again, I have to warn about the danger of mass micro-tourisms. And so this idea is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, particularly related to heritage tourism, religious tourism, and various of the agricultural tourism, things like that, that I've been looking at lately, and how we see these as alternatives, but in reality, they're becoming mass alternatives. So let's see, what else did I have? Oh, and just the idea that, I also have to point out the fact that I think tourism researchers and maybe tourism industry, marketing representatives, for example, we tend to want to get a little bit too specific with regard to types of tourism. And this is something that bothers me a little bit. So for example, I'm starting to see lately a lot of very, very specific tourism, such as football tourism or rugby tourism or blueberry tourism or strawberry tourism. It's a little bit ridiculous, in my opinion, to have all of these tourisms, because there's enough tourisms already that can encompass those forms of tourism. You know, we have agritourism, which is a big form of alternative tourism. Isn't that enough to include strawberry tourism or kiwi or banana tourism, that kind of thing? And so we do see, for example, your past work, Aslam, with tea tourism. You know, tea tourism is it's a huge thing, obviously, for Sri Lanka, but it's also part of heritage tourism. It's also part of agritourism. It's also part of other tourisms. There may be even some religious or spiritual elements associated with it. And so if we try to isolate tourisms in small boxes, I think that we get in trouble. And I had an argument with someone recently, about a year ago or 2 years ago at a conference, and we were talking about dark tourism. And as he was talking about dark tourism, and I suggested, well, yes, it's a form of heritage tourism. And he said, how can dark tourism be heritage tourism? It's about disasters and death. And I said, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's heritage. Darkness is heritage. Most countries of the world have a heritage of darkness. And so this idea of trying to isolate different types of tourism in small boxes is a little bit disingenuous. It's a little bit, I don't understand it. Why are people trying to have, you know, I've seen some papers recently about jail or prison tourism, or it's very strange to me. Mosque tourism or church tourism. There's already tourisms that can include these sorts of things. So that's my personal perspective as a researcher, and maybe from an industry perspective, looking at why do we need to keep shrinking tourism even further into small boxes, and also the fact that these boxes do overlap a lot. But getting back to the issue of sustainability, if in this process of shrinking tourisms into small boxes, if that can somehow encourage sustainability, and I'm not sure if it does, then maybe that's a good thing. Because only people who really appreciate tea are going to go for tea tourism, not just general agri-tourists, for example. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts. I think that we are going to see a growth in specific niche tourisms, specific small market segments that have very specialized interests. For example, I really like cheese. You can see I like cheese, but I'm very interested in cheese tourism in Europe, for example. And so if I go hiking in Switzerland there's a cheese trail where you can walk in the mountains for about 8 hours, and you go from one cheese factory and a farm to a cheese museum to a farm. So for me, that's a very specialized form of agritourism and heritage tourism that really specializes in cheese. Now, if every cheese lover in the world goes on that trail, walks on that trail, then it just becomes a mass tourist attraction. So we do have to be careful how we market it, how we package it, and how we position it. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts.
It's wonderful answer. I think I was expecting a different angle, but you gave me a very, very, amazing point of view. Because you are reminding us to getting back to the Jaffa Jafari's scientific platform. Whatever the tourism you can practice, but make it sustainable or make it planned. So that's maybe the reason what you said. Even you don't say every niche market tourism going to take us to the sustainable development. So as your point, even any tourism could cause the unsustainability. So that's wonderful answer. But still, while we are moving towards, from the large group to the small, highly segmented, very, very specific segmented tourism, the world is now really focusing on to promote the food tourism or meditation tourism or whatever based on the community-based tourism, whatever. So that's good, message to the world, I think, to make it more planned tourism, whatever the tourism we practice. Okay, thank you. I think I like to move towards Hiran again. I think one of the, largest hotel chain is operated under you. I think already, before this pandemic, you have moved towards some sort of niche market products like your product, which is Kaduruketa and even the Jetwing surf and all. Those are unique product, but you are trying to cater to some sort of a special interest tourists. So how do you think how Sri Lanka is going to thrive through this emerging trend of new normal or this diverse or a unique tourism products? As Dallen mentioned, one side we are opening for the tea tourism, the other side we are opening for the food tourism and all. So how do you think, as a leader of the industry, how Sri Lanka is going to, the market and reach this important product as a developing countries? When your thought could be very useful for even other part of the world, right? So how can you?
We are actually, Aslam, as we both know, Sri Lanka, went through a terrible period till 2009. So until then, we did not have much development. Unlike the United States or Europe or even China for that matter, India, our neighbor, we did not have that exponential growth. Since 2009, I am somewhat ashamed to say there was a lot of unplanned development in the hotel sector, right? I mean, we had quite a lot of growth, sometimes 15-20% increase in tourist arrivals per year. And that led to, of course, need for more rooms. And everybody started building rooms, right? Or building hotels. So there are, if we drive around the coast today, we can see there was an unwritten law in our country that we wouldn't, especially along the beach, that we wouldn't build anything above a coconut tree, right? This was not legislated, but this was an unwritten law that everybody practiced. But now lots of big brand names came, Marriott, for example. In fact, I wrote to Marriott and said, aren't you guys ashamed that such probably the largest hotel chain in the world to be operating a hotel with 14 floors on the beach in Valigama, all right? And there was no answer to that, of course. But now our coastline, we get high rises. So this is something that's not really appropriate for a small island. New York City, no questions, right? Las Vegas, no questions. It's in a small area, lots of development, and it's confined to that area. But you don't want to see things popping out in different parts of the coast, just like that. I mean, so this is something that happened, and I sincerely hope, at least in the future now, after this huge shock, that we will not do development like that. We will not go in for, projects that are not really appropriate for a small island like Sri Lanka. We don't have the scale that the United States have, or China, or even our neighbor India. They're massive destinations. There are lots of people who have wealth, who can travel, who can maintain these, but Sri Lanka cannot. So we shouldn't go. We should really focus on small, good practices, engaging our local communities, making sure that the environment is ideally enhanced, not even looked after. You make it a better place for people to go and visit and enjoy. So this is, I think, what we should see happen. And I hope, at least after the elections that is coming up in August, that we will have a proper developmental plan and a proper marketing plan, so that we will identify and attract a certain amount of tourists. Of course, we need tourism, because tourism today contributes at least 5 to 6% of our GDP, and there is potential for tourism to contribute up to 10% of our GDP, right? If we do it properly and if we attract the proper tourists to our country, tourism can, be the miracle that saves, the economy of our island. And as we know, the tourism dollar filters down to everybody. It doesn't remain with just a few companies. When tourists travel, they will buy the king coconut on the street, or they will use a tuk-tuk ride. They will, buy fish from the market. So there's a lot of benefits to people who are not directly involved in tourism. So there is there's benefit. So we need to plan, we need to focus, and then we need to move ahead. If we don't do that, we'll have, more Las Vegas in every beach resort in our country, and that's something that we don't need.
Oh, right. I think as a very, very impressive and inspiring response I got from you as a business giant or a tourism leader. Getting these words from you, it's a really, really, wonderful lesson for the rest of the people in the world. The same thing, I think, as you said, I think you mentioned the coastal area, even our heritage context being changed with the physical development, especially in your area you would have experienced.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the thing, we can't blame the people, but we have to guide them to the right thing. As you said, I think you are taking the responsibility. I think soon after the election, I think you will be able to guide our Sri Lankans. And plus, I think the rest of the world also, we can get a good lesson from you as a tourism leader, as a business, investor, since you gave these words to the world, how to manage ourselves with the available resources, right? Thank you very much. Then I'd like to move towards Alan. Alan, it's a very small question, what I wanted to, raise this in a bigger way, but very small thing, but I like to raise in a bigger way. Now, if you take the, there are compelled to adapt, this unconventional, who practice the sustainable to the, compelled to adapt these concepts, whether we like it or not. The world, this pandemic forced the world to accept it. This is the way you have to practice tourism hereafter, like the message we have got through this pandemic. So since you have already visited Sri Lanka, as a country in a developing destination, right? How do you think that this conventional tourism and this hospital industry to move toward the sustainable tourism development? How can we, what is your advice? Or what is your suggestion for us to move towards the sustainable or tourism, the responsible tourism development hereafter?
Aslam, I hate these kind of questions. I get them all the time. Every time I go someplace, they want me to tell them the answer. Like I'm some god and I'm just going to lay this out and tell people how they can solve all their problems.
But you are the god, Alan.
And well, there is no easy answer. I think I'm actually very impressed with Hiran Couray's work. What he's doing with his hotel companies there in Sri Lanka, and working with local communities and supporting the natural environment. I mean, that's the kind of thing. Of course, that's what needs to be done. That's what everybody should be doing. But of course, as was already been mentioned, we're all, so much of our economy is tied into these neoliberal ideas of, that money, profit is the basis of everything, as Mr. Couray's already mentioned. And that's the thing that needs to change in order for sustainability to become a valid proposition. Now, we're seeing the COVID-19 has brought about at least 2 cases that I know of where countries are doing something, trying to change that model. One is New Zealand. New Zealand has adopted a budget that places primary emphasis on supporting natural environment, indigenous populations, local communities. Those are the key variables that they are using to decide where to spend money in the new budget that they have going forward. The other country, not quite exactly the same model, but is Germany. Germany has placed green energy as #1 in their budget for the coming year, the greening of their economy in that way. So, and both of these, I think, are things that have come directly out of this pandemic, these changes in policy. And so I'm hoping, you know, that, and I think we will actually see more of this in countries around the world. I think the US is going to be the last country to do this. But smaller countries like Sri Lanka, it's perfect, you know. But you know, but of course that depends on who gets elected into office and what the agenda, what is the consciousness of the population. Because I think both Germany and New Zealand, their governments are basically reflecting what the majority of their people want in adopting these kind of policies. And so, because you can't force people to do these kind of things. And so for Sri Lanka, you know, to become a more sustainable country, you know, what I was saying earlier, the people have to change. The people themselves have to want this more than anything else. And that will then result in changes in the government and moving that into becoming a government policy and money and resources. And so I think the COVID-19 pandemic is pushing us in that direction. I think the next disaster, I don't know what it's going to be, but I think there will be one very soon within the next few years. Because the world has just gotten too small. We're going to see disaster after disaster. Pandemic may not be a pandemic, it might be something else. I mean, climate change is just knocking at our door like crazy, and it's also part of this pandemic scenario. We're just going to see this more and more, and it's just going to keep hammering this idea of sustainability into people's minds, and actually changing people, changing the populations of countries. I think Sri Lanka has a lot of opportunity for that to impact them enough so that they actually change and become more like what New Zealand and Germany is doing. I think there's going to be a lot of countries that are going to be doing that. But like I said, I don't have that much hope for the US, so. Not in the short term. The longer term, yeah, but not in the short term. So the thing is, we're in a period of transition. You're going to see a lot of extremes on both ends, both sustainability oriented and the opposite of sustainability. You're going to see them. And so the thing that needs to happen is that those people who really support a more conscious, aware, intentional Earth need to really come forward and express themselves and not be intimidated by those economic interests that are really just after money and nothing else.
All right.
It's not very specific, but anyway, that's
the message what we needed. You gave the real message. Alan, I think Dallen, as he said, that he is a god, because you know what you said very precisely. If I say we need change in 3 P's: change in people, change in policy, change in practice. If we bring change in these 3, I think that we can visualize the sustainability.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. Yeah, that's good. Well said.
Oh, that's a message, wonderful message. I think, thank you very much. So again, I think Dallen, I'm going to put you in a little bit trouble. You know, I think this is a little bit a harder question. You know, we realize the climate change, global warming, unsustainability of degradation of the resources and everything. But still the world is moving toward the sky tower, strategic cities, port cities, lot of, huge development. Whatever said and done in a sustainable, it's null and veil when we got this development. For me, even Sri Lanka or in any part of the world, how this could be, rectified? Will there be a possibility to rectify, to think, differently rather than moving towards these, sky towers and the strategic cities and all these things?
Well, that is a difficult question, and I'm going to pass that one back to Professor Lew. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's a really critical question, and you're right, it is a difficult question, and I think I'm going to take a little bit of a cultural perspective on this. It seems some of the work that I'm doing in traditional societies in the non-Western context, there's this assumption that bigger is better. Or there's this assumption, and it's a cultural tradition. I know in various societies in East Asia, for example, that old is bad, new is good. And that old means backwards, old means undeveloped. New and big means developed and forward thinking. So there's this perception that the more that we can physically develop our city or our destination or our coastal area, the more modern, the more economically sustainable we will be. And like Professor Lew just mentioned, tourism generally is one of those neoliberal, like he said, globalist neoliberal market economic drivers that say let's do more and more and more, and it's primarily driven by profits. If you look at places like Hainan Island in China, where there have traditionally been beautiful rainforests and beautiful beaches, and if you take a photograph that was taken of the beach near Sanya City 20 years ago, it's a beautiful beach, beautiful water, beautiful rainforest against the beach. And today it's just really a row of hotels. And we're starting to see that this is part of this idea, and it's not just Hainan Island and it's not just China, but there's this perception out there that the more we can build, and it has to be built, it has to be human created buildings, the more we build and the bigger we make it, the more tourism we're going to receive. And the more economy we'll create. And like Professor Lew mentioned, but they're not thinking of the long term. I agree with what he said about the United States being really behind a lot of the world, because half the population in this country doesn't agree with much of what the rest of the world agrees with. And so this idea of non-Western perspectives, I think we're starting to see the concept of sustainability that we're practicing under is a very Western-driven concept, because indigenous people from around the world have different perspectives on sustainability, for example. And maybe we need to listen more to the indigenous people and to the native peoples who understood their sustainability better than they understand this Western model of sustainability. But getting back to my point is this traditional thinking that if you build it, they will come. And the more you build, the more will come. And the more you build, then the more modern you are. And there's these perceptions of some work I'm doing in Africa and in China and other parts of Asia, where traditional is not good. It's old-fashioned. We want to move away from that. So if we can build this huge resort, or if we can build these huge skyscrapers and amusement parks and ski resorts in the desert, then that shows that we're modern, that shows that we're developed. And so I don't know if there's a way to change that thinking, but the idea is that preserving tradition is backwards. It's old-fashioned, it's not development. Whereas I think sustainable development is more about tradition. It is more about indigenous people. It is more about smaller scale in many ways. So I noticed that Professor Lew wrote a comment in the comments chat section that there is probably, he hopes, and I do too, that there's a way that mass tourism can eventually be sustainable tourism, that there we can have sustainable mass tourism if it's planned and managed properly. But I don't think we're at that level yet. So my concluding point is that this sort of overdevelopment from a physical perspective is problematic in many ways. It taxes resources, it increases concerns about climate change. A lot of people are, a lot of non-nationals are brought in to work, and that creates a lot of issues. But something that's very interesting I want to point out too, it's off the subject a little bit, but sometimes this sort of physical overdevelopment that we're seeing in a lot of less developed countries and also in the Gulf states of the Middle East, this sort of overdevelopment after time becomes part of the heritage of that place. And so it's an interesting perspective. So for example, David Weaver, several years ago, he wrote a paper about Las Vegas. And he said that tourism and gambling in Las Vegas is the heritage of Las Vegas. So if you're going to Las Vegas to gamble, you're actually going to participate in heritage tourism, because the overdevelopment of gaming tourism in Las Vegas is Las Vegas's heritage. And so we are starting to see that certain places in Hainan in China, for example, or in Dubai, wherever, that overdevelopment is now becoming the heritage of that place. And when I go to Dubai or to Qatar, those countries, the people there, they really have to search for their traditional heritage because they don't know where to find it anymore. And so in a sense, that's not very sustainable. So those ideas don't necessarily go well together, but from the one perspective, I think we need to conceptualize how traditional thinking affects sustainability. And scale of development is a big part of that. But then also, this overdevelopment becomes part of the character of the place and it loses its traditional identity. Is that good? Is it bad? Is it wrong for us to impose that on places? Is it wrong for outsiders to impose on places that you need to preserve your part of your original culture and heritage? Or do we just say, look, it's up to you if it's locally driven? So there's a lot of questions, and like Professor Lew said, we don't have the answers, but we do know that there are guiding principles for planners and marketers and developers who can really help in these efforts. That's just some loose thoughts I have. Aslam, any comments?
Thank you. Thank you. Because, that's one of the, the question or one of the issues, I think, prolonged issue, right? And as you explained, because I wanted to get your idea, because you have a, wide experience all over the world. So that's why, I wanted to know how the world will respond to this. Of course, no more old is gold. That's your perception. So earlier we were thinking the old is gold. No more old is gold. So therefore people wanted to see the new fashion, new trend, new things. So that is the part of culture. So that caused a lot of, new development in the world. But anyhow, in another way, it's going to be the, biggest threat for the global warming, climate change, energy reduction, and every issues. So, and as you said, can be a part of the heritage after some time. People may make it as a heritage. Oh, that's a wonderful turn if we can emphasize this, right? Rather than stopping now and move toward the heritage. The enough is enough. Okay, thank you very much. I think I'd like to move toward a little bit with the Hiran, especially with the Hiran. I think most of the people, as a businessman, one thing we know: bigger investment, bigger ROI. This is even we have been taught, and I taught to my children, right? Do bigger business, make bigger ROI. Return on investment is high. But as you said, from your being compared to, when I was thinking over the statement, the explanation with the Dallen and Alan, and plus your previous explanations, will the hotel industry or tourism giants like to go for a lesser investment with less ROI? Because already, as you mentioned, many people have gone for the massive investment, but I think they are now with the, I think, no ROI, no return on investment. So they make, even during the normal situation, before the pandemic, very less marginal revenue on their investment, especially in Nuarali, I was, going through this situation. How the people will respond to go to this, sort of a niche tourism or a new normal or a neo-tourism, where they invest little and expect little. Would it be possible? Your policy, your theory. Very simple question for you.
Well, I have a, I mean, I have a, I'll twist it a little bit, Aslam, if you don't mind. I think, I would rather prefer to say high the risk, high the gain. Lower the risk, lower the gain, in that way. But on the return on investment side, I don't necessarily say a very well-run, unique eco-lodge with luxury components involved can give you a greater return on investment. Because I can, in fact, if you like to bring your students one day to Jetwing Villuena in Sigiriya, for example, where we have converted, completely dilapidated, abandoned paddy field into 2 lakes, and then we've started growing paddy the traditional way, and then this is literally a small wildlife sanctuary now, because so much of water-based animals and land-based animals are there. We've done research on the slender loris. We've done now doing research on the fishing cat and so on. So that, to us, after the National Geographic Traveler came and said, this is one of the top 10 eco-luxury lodges in the world. This happened about 10 years ago. Suddenly the North American market and the European market opened out. And we've done pretty well until last year, until we had the bombings which killed tourism before COVID. We were doing exceptionally well. So when you compare the return on investment on a project like that, I would say it's far greater than even some of the larger projects that I have seen, not necessarily in Sri Lanka, but in some other countries as well. So if you do it very well, do it carefully, plan it well, position it well, sometimes the return on investment can be even greater. I mean, I know people who are doing whitewater rafting or, cycling tours and so on and so forth. Again, small investment, but the return can be great. I know you two are doing bird watching tours in Sri Lanka. I mean, investment is literally nothing, but the return can be great. So the return is something that, can be greater than even what one expects. So therefore, I'd like to encourage your students and everybody else who's listening. Yeah, as you very rightly said, you don't need to plan massive investments to get into tourism or to continue in tourism. But if you do whatever you're doing well, you position it well, you service your customers well, you treat your people well. I think the other important aspect is that the people who work for you, you have to look after them well. I mean, if they are not motivated, if they are not committed to serving those guests, then you're going to get into problems as well. So these are aspects that we must talk of. And I don't know how much longer I will get to talk, but another aspect I like to talk about is not only sustainability, I like to talk about peace. I served on the UN Tourism Ethics Committee under Taleb Rifai. Taleb Rifai is a former UN Secretary General for Tourism, UNWTO. And Taleb, when he was the Secretary General of World Tourism Organization, he brought in the 4th P. We talk of people, planet, and profit. And he brought in the 4th P, which is peace. I mean, now, Aslam, as you will agree, we have forgotten about the peace and reconciliation in our country. We had a huge issue last April. And before that, we had a greater issue until 2009. So, we were seeing our country kind of segregated towards sometimes towards religious lines, sometimes towards ethnic lines. I mean, we've seen that happening in America in a big way now, and that spread like wildfire into other countries, including our own country in a little way. So these are things that tourism should address. I mean, bringing peace through tourism. I mean, you cannot sustain anything if there is no peace in the world. If there is no love, compassion, empathy in the world, you cannot do anything. So this is something that tourism must promote as well. You bring in people, planet, profit, and peace. All these combined, you know, then we have a world that is, you know, completely sustainable, completely good. This is something that we in tourism must promote, because the hatred seems to, you know, spread faster than love, compassion, and empathy in the world. Even in our country, we've experienced this in a small community such as ours, right? You know, what I see now that's happening in the world is, you know, it's alarming. I mean, forget sustainability, you know, people will start killing one another for small issues. So we in tourism, we are traveling, we travel, we understand different religions, we understand different cultures, we learn to respect, love, embrace those religions, cultures, and everything else that is prevalent in the world. And that has to be spread through tourism, through education, through experience sharing, and so on. So this is something that's important. And I think that we need to focus on this aspect as well, while focusing on sustainability and profits as well.
Thank you. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Wonderful message you gave to the Sri Lankan community as well as for the global community as a, you know, tourism business practitioner. Because this is what we need, you know, rather than focusing on ROI, you know, we have to focus on more on peace, right? That's
ROI will come with it. ROI will definitely come with it, because
yes.
when you do the right thing,
Right.
I'm a firm believer that God will provide.
Of course, really. So that's an amazing message. I think Alan, you have visited Sri Lanka twice, I think, right? You had a good experience in Sri Lankan food, Sri Lankan things. I still can recall in one of your profile picture, you put one of the very rural boutique, and you had taken one of your picture and you posted me in your profile. Very small boutique in a hill country. You had a picture, right, in your profile. That shows you enjoyed more than our popular sites, everything. You have enjoyed one of the hidden attraction in Sri Lanka. So like that, Sri Lanka is one of the countries, you know, we have a huge, diverse tourism resources, and most of them are still untouched and lesser known attractions. We have a huge potential, but, you know, how can we, you know, make it, rather than going towards the complex tourism, to make it a simplified tourism, and to let the people to enjoy all these, you know, minute, you know, lesser known or a hidden tourism, most valuable, unique things in the, especially in most of the developing countries.
Okay, so first I just wanted to make one comment on Hiran Couray's what he was just saying. I actually wrote an article recently. It was more of a blog, but the title was something like "How COVID-19 is All About Overcoming Othering." And this is something that I've been interested in, and how tourism can help us to overcome this idea of others. We're constantly treating people who are not like us as others, as different and not valuable. This is the basis of you know, discrimination, of exploitation, of not only other people, but also the natural environment. We treat the natural environment as something that's other, that's not part of us. And so we can exploit it, we can destroy it for profit. And so, so anyway, my article was saying COVID-19 and the George Floyd murder incident is one way of one of the major messages is that we need to overcome this separation of people, this separating us from other people, separating us from the natural environments that we live in, and how we need to bring all that together, you know, as this a greater sense of oneness, of connection. And so I totally agree. Is basically what I'm saying with Hiran's comments. So simple tourism. There's a presentation that I often do for undergraduate students when I'm visiting universities. That basically, I had this experience a number of years ago, and this kind of dawned on me that I go to these places around the world. I don't travel quite as much as Dallen, but I still travel more than anybody else I know in my community. And I go to these places and I see the big attractions, you know, the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, or the Eiffel Tower, or whatever, those, you know, those things that everybody has to see. And I go there and I see them and I take a lot of pictures. And in some ways, I guess I'm satisfied that I went there and I saw what everybody goes there to see. But that's not really what I remember about the places I go to. When I look back at the places I've been to, the things that I remember are things that were totally unpredicted, really. They're experiences that happened in that place, in that trip, that I didn't expect, that I had not planned. You know, I planned to see the big attraction, but then other things happen. And those tend to be the things that I most remember. The one for Sri Lanka that I most remember, you know, Sri Lanka doesn't quite have as many, you know, these huge, major, famous tourist attractions. I did go to the festival in Kandy. What's the name of the festival? The Buddhist Elephant Festival.
Temple of Truth. Our pageant, SUSL pageant.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you took me to that.
Yes.
So I did see that, but the thing that I remember of Sri Lanka that impressed me more than anything, both trips that I went to, the one thing that really sticks in my mind that to me is the treasure of my experience was, I don't know, you recall, you took me up into the mountains, into the tea area around Kandy. Yes. And we met this lady.
Oh, right.
It was at sunset. It was getting dark. We were lost, right? You were going to show me something we couldn't find us. So we were lost in the middle of nowhere. And we met this lady who was walking up the road with these big bunch of flowers. And you said, oh, she's bringing those flowers for an offering. Yeah. And so we stopped, and we had seen a lot of really interesting religious things going on in this place. And it turned out this lady is a healer, a spiritual healer who challenges Mari, the goddess Durga, and uses that to heal all the people in that place. And to me, meeting her was the highlight of everything I ever did in Sri Lanka. You know, so it's things like that totally unexpected, you know, that you experience. And it doesn't happen every trip. But the opportunity to do something like that, you know, it has to be created in some way. So one of my last international trips was actually to Hainan Island, where Dallen was talking about. And I was going to go there, give a talk at a conference, but then I wanted to spend a little more time there. And so what I planned was to have no plans. I basically said, I'm going to go here, I'm going to stay in this little hotel in the downtown area with no plans at all. And I'm just going to go and wander and see what I experience. And it was great. I had so much fun. It was really, you know, definitely better than the conference. You know, and so in some ways, I think more people need to travel like that. There is a form of travel, you know, where you pay somebody and they organize a trip for you and you have no idea what that trip is. this is a new travel product where people plan, they come, they meet you, they interview you, they get to know you, they plan a trip for you, and you do not know what that trip is. You might know what the destination is, but you have no idea what you're going to do. And then you go and experience that. To me, this is the best kind of travel, is unexpected, unplanned things that just happen. And a country like Sri Lanka is, I think, an ideal place for that. I think many developing countries, the more developed the country is, the harder it is to do that, in my opinion. The harder it is to have an unplanned, really deep connection that you can make with that country. Less developed countries, I think there's a lot more opportunity for that because there's so much more that is unknown. Now, how you develop a product like that, I don't know. I'm always I tell the students when I give this lecture, you have to go out there and take a risk. You have to, don't plan, just go and just see what happens. And I don't know how many of them do that. It's not easy. It's so much easier to plan than to not plan. But to me, and I think, yeah, and I think you're right. Sri Lanka is really an ideal place for that kind of experience, in my opinion.
Good. I think, yeah, wonderful, amazing. The sort of a, very, very interesting answer here that you had. You came up with what that all lady who were wearing and things and offering for the goddess, right? In the hill country of the Hantana. Hiran, we went a late evening visit to Hantana one day when he was in Kandy. So that's, I think, you see, in Sri Lanka, how much it is important. Every single thing in the country is valuable tourism attraction. That is what, Alan wanted to point out. Since, so we have a lot to develop in the country. But only one thing, I think Hiran will agree with me, because we have always moved toward the typical or, so-called attractions or the so popular attraction, or we have a round tours or anything, we make only the traditional map. So I think Alan has given a very good idea for us to, rethink or in new way to map out our tourism. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think all three has, I think, valuable, your contribution is marvelous. I think for me, getting a knowledge of international and diverse world and, contributing from the Sri Lankan context, from the Hiran, I think two of you all have done a reasonable and or is, beyond our expectation. Your contribution is marvelous for our students as well as for the other participants. I think they would have got a, very good messages or take-home baggages from this webinar. They would have a very good take-home baggage from the webinar. So I would like to invite Hiran, I think with the, things to get back to the webinar and take over the Q&A session.
Yes, Professor Aslam, thank you very much. And I think I'm also asking for the audience for their questions, but until they raise the questions, meantime, I was hearing to your discussion, so I have, and myself and our team has developed some questions. So first of all, I would like to ask them. So when it's come to the peace, as Hiran mentioned, when it's come to the peace, and when it's come to the heritage, as Professor Dallen mentioned, when it's come to the intercultural exchange that we do in the tourism industry, I have one example. I was come across when I went to Noredia very recently. It was a place developed by Mr. Hiran Cooray, actually. Its name is the Minamas place. Am I correct? So it has been,
yes, that's correct.
That particular place has been developed.
Minamas line rooms.
Yeah, Minamas line rooms, and that's how they have the Jetwings, hotels, and that particular sustainable. That's how they have taken that particular tourism concept to the line rooms in the Nuwara tea estates, and that's how actually the sustainability is working according to my feeling. So with that, I would like to ask a question from Hiran Cooray. I need a kind of further explanation for that as well. And how do you take the challenge of promoting expensive, expensive hotel rooms to the local clientele at the moment? Because at the moment as well, every hotelier is trying to get some promotion. They're coming with the promotions, the low rates for the hotel rooms. So what would be your opinion? I'm asking two questions from you.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Meenamma's line rooms, Hiran. This is something very close to my heart. I'm not sure whether Alan and Dallen have visited the tea plantations where the tea pluckers or the plantation workers live. That's a bit of a sad history part, where these people were brought in from India by the British in the 19th century, latter part of 19th century, and they were literally stateless for some time, but now they are citizens of Sri Lanka and they do have voting rights and everything. But they're people who struggle. They've been through rough living conditions in the mountains, cold weather, leeches and everything else, and they do all the hard work plucking tea. And their salaries today are about 750 rupees a day. That's in US dollar terms, less than $4. So we have a bungalow in the tea plantations, and there we have this lady called Meena who works there, and she's educating her two daughters. So I thought to myself, I need to do something better than just pay this lady 750 rupees a day. So where she lives, there were two empty what we call line rooms is basically a row of rooms with a bathroom and a kitchen. That's where these people live. So I spent money, converted two of them into proper, a little bit more comfortable than how they would be living, but no other alterations. Introduced hot water because a lot of Western travelers are used to having a hot water shower. That's the only, and a water closet instead of a scotting pan. And I told Meena, look, you run it. You give the same food that you all eat in your home. How you cook your food. They mainly eat vegetarian food. So fine, don't give any meats. Just your vegetarian food. The way you drink your tea, make it absolutely an authentic experience. A lot of social justice warriors found fault with me and the company for doing this. And we ran into a lot of, people started writing stories about it. How can Jetwing do this? I said, no, I'm trying to allow people to experience real life, real situation, right? And if the others want to improve the living conditions of the other line room workers, by all means come and do it, but don't attack us for doing this. So Hiran, unfortunately, we are still struggling to market it well because a lot of people didn't market it. But anytime your students want to come and experience it, spend a day or two with Meena, learn how they live. By the way, she's educated her two girls. One of the girls now is studying finance, and I'm very happy about it. With all the work she's done with us, she's educated the girls, and they'll have a much better life than the mother. And the show goes on. But sometimes social media can do bad as well. Kill the golden opportunity for her. To show how they live and also to make some extra money for herself. Anyway, that's that. But do bring your students, and we'll be more than happy to allow them to experience how these people live in the line rooms. On the Sri Lankan part, getting Sri Lankan customers, we are probably the leading brand for the Sri Lankan guests, Hiran. So we have a large database. We have what is called Aradhana, a Jetwing loyalty club. We have quite a number of members in that, so it's easy for us to communicate with them. And moment we do the special offers, Sri Lankans do follow us. So I'm happy to say last Saturday, a couple of days ago, about 6 of our hotels were completely full. And we have also given 4 of the properties for quarantine purposes. The hotels near Nigambo, near the airport in Nigambo, we've offered to the government for quarantine purposes. So a lot of people are happy with the services we are providing, because it's 14 days of mandatory quarantine for those Sri Lankans returning home. So we're providing them shelter and care for a very minimum rate, which was also agreed upon with the COVID committee. Hope that answers your questions. Yeah.
I think you are a role model to show as responsible tourism now.
I'm not sure whether Alan and Dallen knows Megan Epler-Wood. She was one of the people who was in the Ecotourism Society. She lives in, I think, Burlington, Vermont. I went to and visited her in Vermont, and she then, she has been to Sri Lanka as well, and she asked me to lecture to the Harvard University students who was doing their master. I said, Megan, what do you want me to lecture to the Harvard University sustainable degree students? She said, Hiran, you are doing what I am teaching is theory, but you are living it and you are doing it. So, share your story with the Harvard students. And I had 45 minutes of, telling what we are doing here in Sri Lanka to the Harvard Master Students of Sustainability.
Can I say something, Aslam?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I want to applaud Hiran Cooray because I think that he's very, very forward-thinking from a hotelier's perspective. And I feel that in his heart, I agree 100% what he said about peace, what he said about everyone getting along. And I think that he's contributing to that. I really like the fact, both of those examples you gave about using some of your properties as quarantine properties. Mm-hmm. Because that demonstrates sustainability in a number of different ways. Yeah. For example, obviously, you're providing a service to the community during this crisis. And you're getting a little bit of money back as a way to cover your costs. Sure. And I think that that's a really good, mutually beneficial relationship. So congratulations on that. In terms of your lion rooms, I am also a proponent of social justice, but I think that there are some social justice warriors that take things a little too far. And what you're describing is not the same as in South Africa, where you can pay a lot of money to stay in a shanty town or in a poor person's house. Mm-hmm. For $200 a night, you can stay in a small shack, that kind of thing. It's more, you're providing an authentic experience to the visitor, but by the same token, you're allowing Mina the opportunity, for example, to earn extra money beyond the amount of the standard rate, and which will help educate her daughters, like you said, for example. And so I applaud you for your forward thinking. The idea that you're using your properties to help with the quarantine, that's a really good example of resilience and a really good example of adaptability. So I'm going to use those 2 examples in my teaching, if that's okay with you, Hiran.
Thank you. Please do.
Even if you want, you can share. He will share the pictures with you.
Yes. I can do that, and of course, it's on the website as well. But I can share it privately also. Yes.
Because I have set for a couple of presentation of Dallen. He has a world, global collection of the pictures. Wonderful pictures. The more messages.
And Professor Aslam, we are receiving some questions from the audience. So I will, there was a question regarding the cultural hostility, I think. Yeah, I have seen the question. I'll ask it that way. Professor Aslam, one of the students was asking, I think the Dakshina was asking that, uh, uh, are there any cultural hostility among the local community when we are promoting the tourism with the situation like COVID-19? Because there was a kind of a attitude generated in the minds of the local community that the particular the viral was coming from the international scenario. It was spread to the tourists. So what would be the answer, your opinion?
Actually, yeah, maybe I can answer that since I'm involved in the tourism here. There was initially in February and early part of March, when we had tourists coming here, there was hostility. I'm ashamed to say this, but there was hostility towards the Chinese travelers. Because they believe that this disease came from China, and then when Chinese tourists were traveling in the country, there were incidents that were reported to us that it was quite embarrassing. But there was no physical harm done to the tourists, but came close to that. But now I think there's quite a bit of education, and they know that it can spread from anybody to anybody. And with that education done, I think when tourism restarts, there will be less hostility. There was hostility at the start, but I hope with all the the TV presentations done, the educational programs done, all that has gone on, the literature that has come out, with all of that, I think if tourists do start coming back, there wouldn't be as bad hostility as it was in the months of February and March. That's the way I see it. I don't know whether Aslam you see it differently.
I think the ideal person for me to add something from Dallen, because Dallen has already contributed a lot in this cultural spiritualism and the community perspectives and how the people take this culture and the differences things. I think the book which is on culture and spiritual tourism will be very worthwhile for us to get some idea from you. Dallen?
Well, the only thing that I can really say about that is that every culture has prejudices, unfortunately. And, but this is getting back to Hiran's original comment, earlier comment about getting along and peace and developing relationships, because we are all brothers and sisters. We all share this earth. And regardless of religion or faith or political viewpoints, I think it's critical that we look beyond all of those things to say, as Alan mentioned also, that we're part of the earth, we're part of the ecosystem, and we need to behave like it, because I think Mother Earth is getting a little bit tired. Mother Earth is getting a little bit tired of how we're treating her. And this may be this pandemic may be one of the results of that. She's tired, and when we get tired, we get a little bit upset, we get a little bit irritable. And so that's part of that. From a spiritual, religious, or a cultural perspective, I think that it's about education. It's about trying to eliminate ignorance. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of racism against Chinese all over the world because of this pandemic. And it's really unfortunate because the Chinese didn't start this pandemic. I mean, maybe the disease derived from China, but the Chinese people did not start this pandemic. And so, unfortunately, human beings, we have this tendency to generalize too much, or to assign blame. And so I've heard it's not just in Sri Lanka, Iran, it's also all over the world, even in the United States as well, which has its own prejudices, obviously. But the Chinese have been unwelcomed. And that's really tragic, because all of the Chinese people I know are wonderful people.
Yeah.
And all of the Chinese that I know wouldn't do anything to harm anyone else. And it makes me feel sad that any group is targeted for something that maybe its government does, or if this disease derived from China, it's not the Chinese people's fault. And unfortunately, we as human beings, we want to blame someone. We always have a desire to blame someone. And that does translate into prejudices and targeting people unfairly. But again, culturally, there's a lot of cultural differences associated with that. And I think that there are some cultures that are more prone to be either targets or targeted. And so, anyway, there are a lot of different ways we could take this, but I believe that prejudice has no place in tourism. And
oh, thank you. I think adding to Dallen and Hiran, one thing, very, very simply, two things I can, mention here about this, cultural hostility. As Sri Lankan, I think we have to get back to our history. Before the world get the definition for the people first governance, Sri Lankan kings who have practiced that. Even they have sacrificed their own life on behalf of the people. So that means here the kings even didn't mind what is the race or what is the things or what is their demography or nothing. They want the people to be together and people to move forward. So as a nation, we had that history. We give the preference for the people. So therefore, as Sri Lankans, I don't think if we can insert my second, the things what I want to mention, the grassroots dialogue. I think already SLTD, Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, has started this, spreading these messages and the social media campaign and all. So what we need is more and more dialogue with the grassroots community to, as Alan said, bring out, from the ignorance and the misunderstanding. So if we can have more dialogue like these sessions, if we can go to the, grassroots level and talk to the people and interact with the people and work at the grassroots level before we reopen the destination, I think completely we can avoid this cultural hostility. Alan, you want to add anything?
Oh, I just typed in the chat box that hostility is driven by fear. When people are afraid, they react. And one of the ways they react is in a hostile way because they're trying to protect themselves. So it's really the person who's experiencing the fear, that's the problem. And so you have to figure out how do you comfort that fear? How do you make that person feel safe? And that's how you deal with hostility. But, yeah, and of course with this COVID-19, there's a lot of fear in the world because people don't know, they've lost control and they don't know what the future is, and that causes fear. So I think if they were to practice more Buddhist and Hindu beliefs, that is, to be here now, to accept that the world is always changing, that the only thing that's really stable is yourself, your consciousness and awareness. Those are the teachings. I know, not everybody knows that level of the teachings, but that's really how we need to approach the pandemic, the whole issue of what the world is facing today, in my opinion.
Professor Aslam.
Any other question?
Professor Aslam, actually, I was going through the chat box, and the Shiromi Kaluarachi, I think she is one of the graduated from the Department of Tourism Management. Now she is working for a DMC in Sri Lanka. So she is asking, she has typed a lot, but as a essence, she's asking that if the beginners is trying to enter to the tourism industry at this pandemic moment, what are the facts he should focus on? So at the moment, the Dallen Timothy also replied her, Professor Dallen Timothy. So I would like to, invite Professor Dallen Timothy to explain it bit.
Good.
So my next question, I think it goes to him as well.
Thank you, Hiran. I think that it's a really good question that Shromi raises this very important question. Where do you begin? And I don't know, other than to say that maybe we should focus on, and actually Alan Lew has done more work on this than I have, but looking at community resilience, destination resilience. How do destinations, how do industry leaders, how do industry sectors bounce back? What is the best way of adapting to situations? And I think that we all have to, if we're working in the tourism industry, we all have to develop skills and talents and abilities. But I think one of those on both, and this gets back to what Alan Lew was saying with the Buddhist philosophy of remaining constant, remaining yourself and taking care of yourself, realizing that the world is constantly changing. As an industry or as a destination, we also should have that same Buddhist philosophy, that we can remain valuable, we can remain constant in a world of change as long as we're adaptable and resilient to that change. I think resilience and adaptability need to play a more important role in our education of our tourism students. Because when we run into a crisis, and all of us have talked about, there will be other crises. This is just one of many. We've seen many crises in the past. We're going to see many more crises in the future, particularly as Mother Earth gets a little bit more anxious and offended by our behaviors. That how do we deal with this? We need the example that I gave you of Las Vegas and other places, you know. How do we deal with being resilient and adaptable to change? Maybe that we need to integrate that more into our skill set, into our learning of our students. How, on a very local level, as a tourist, or as a service provider, or as a sector, or as a government agency, or as a destination, or even as a country, at any scale, how can we become more adaptable and more resilient to change? Whether that's through planning, marketing, demarketing, or recovery marketing, those different things. So I'm thinking that we're talking about climate change, we're talking about sustainability, we're doing all of these great things for our students. But now I believe we need to, because of this pandemic, it's really that awareness we talked about in the beginning. It's really important that we start integrating into our training. And I think Hiran Cooray would also agree with this. For our students who are going to work in the industry, this idea of resilience planning or being adaptable. What are the contingency plans? What can we do to lessen the impact of pandemics or wars or conflict on the industry?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Timothy and Professor Aslam. Actually, we are running out of the time now. It's already like 9 o'clock here in Sri Lanka. But however, we have two questions. If it is possible, if Professor Timothy and Hiran Cooray is okay to answer those two questions, we can continue at least for 10 minutes more, or otherwise
let's finish off with those two. Let's take those two and finish off.
Yeah,
Hiran.
yeah. Is Professor Alan Lew okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So actually, I am expecting kind of the quick answers for these. Based on the discussions, actually, it was talking about the different types of the tourism that would be possible to happen, or that would be possible to practice in the new normal after the COVID-19 pandemic. So the question is, what type of tourism would be there in the new normal?
Alan, I think
so we don't really know. When we say normal, all we can say is today. What type of tourism is there today? We can't really say what's, because the new normal has not arrived. A new normal assumes there's some kind of stability, and there is no stability right now. So I think it's going to be domestic. It's going to be what some people call proximity tourism. That means not going very far, but just getting away. Some people have suggested if you live in a big city, maybe you can book a hotel in another part of the city that you never go to. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think,
so anyway, that's what I think. It's going to be mostly domestic and proximity tourism for people who just really need to get away.
If I can say a few words on that, if we really look at it, it might take another 6 months or so for us to return to some form of normalcy in tourism arrivals. And as I was saying before, for me, the only new normal should be that we plan, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, that we plan our product and positioning very well during this period. Not to rush into it again. Look at our cultural sites, look at our national parks, look at all the other religious sites people go to, give them an enhanced experience, protect those sites for the future, do all those visitor management strategies, plan all of that, and be ready. Because when the new normal comes, the so-called new normal, people will start traveling again in big numbers. We cannot stop that. Airlines will open out again. More and more airlines will start flying again to different parts of the world because their money is stuck now somewhere. So people will travel. So for that, the only new normal I like to see is that we protect our assets that we have. The assets are the Sigiriya, Polonnaru, Anuradhapura, Dambul, Yala, Vilpat, all the national parks, the tea highlands, all of that. Protect those so that future generations can enjoy as well, just as much as we are enjoying now.
Thank you very much. I think it's very nice explanations regarding that. So I think I have to skip my last question, because my last question is about the sustainable mass tourism. What would be the shape of the sustainable mass tourism? But I think the answers has been given. You know, especially the Hiran's answer, it was there. How we should protect our resources, the Sigiriya, Anuradhapura, Polonnaru, and all. So with that, Professor Aslam, I would like to hand over the baton you again. So I think we need, from the side of the department, as students, majority of the students are there in the audience. From my side, I rather prefer if our two professors and the Hiran can give one last word before we wind up the session. So I'm handing over you to Professor Aslam.
Yeah, I think what the department and our university wanted to do is one of our national commitment as well as an international commitment as a university, to connect the experiential knowledge and the academic or research and publication knowledge towards the future of the world, with the resilience and the future plan. So accordingly, I think we were able to gather the most important three resource person. One person, is from Sri Lankan context. I think he's the most authoritative and the right person we have selected with the wide experience from the ancient route. So therefore, Mr. Hiran Cooray and my good
Don't make me a monument.
Right, because your father is a monument for us. Still we recall your father. That's why I said the ancient route.
Thank you.
right? So, and you know, I have a long relationship with Alan and Dallen, and who are the almost like for us in internationally mentor or else the leader for us to in academic. And because they have contributed one good book, I think everybody can take over that book. That is a companion to tourism, Alan. Am I right? It's a wide, big book, companion to tourism, and I think everybody has contributed. I think almost the large number of scholars have contributed that particular book. And that's a very good book. I think as a handbook, if you can use. So like that, I think number of publication, the contribution. So that is why we wanted to connect from the global arena. Professor Alan and Dallen Timothy, Michael Hall, and Harold Goodwin. Most probably we will be having another session with the Harold Goodwin and Michael Hall. And from again, Lee Jollifer is ready with the tea tourism. In future, we'll be meeting. So anyhow, today's session, most importantly, but I wanted to thank all our valuable resource persons, right? Three people from for me, very, very inspiring characters. For this, I have taken from these things. So I had to give a chance for all three people to give the last words to this webinar audience and the world. I think I have recorded part of this program. We will share it later. But I think, Dallen, shall we start from you?
Sure. We'll save the best for last, so we'll start with me. It's been a really big honor for me to be here. Thank you, Aslam, for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I just want to encourage everyone to think holistically and think broadly, think futuristically. As Alan mentioned a minute ago, the new normal is we have to take it day by day, because the new normal today is not the new normal for tomorrow. And I think that might be a philosophical argument, but it's about being adaptable. It's about being resilient. It's about understanding people's behaviors, good planning, and adaptability. I hope none of us knows what the future will be like from a tourism perspective, but one outcome that I think that's one thought that's come from all of our perspectives is that we will all become more responsible tourists. Even the mass tourists, if they return and if mass tourism returns, which it probably will in the long term, hopefully even the mass tourism will adopt some elements of sustainability, and that we will be much more aware. I think the human awareness and the responsibility, there was a book published a few years ago about responsible tourism, and I wrote a chapter on responsible destinations. So every stakeholder, the tourists need to be responsible, the industry sectors need to be responsible, the destination needs to be responsible. We all have responsibility for successful and sustainable tourism. So if we can gear our thinking, our learning, our skill set towards being responsible and aware, then I think we'll be better off. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Dallen. Alan, shall we have a few words from you?
Okay, try to keep it short. Thanks again for inviting me to this. This has been fun. Yes, it's true. We don't really know what's going to happen in the future. And in some ways, and I've said it as well, we just have to kind of be open and adaptable. However, there are ways that we can create our future, that we can influence what's going to happen. And I think, we may not know exactly how we're going to do this, but I think the best way to start that is to stay positive, to think, to not let all of this doom and gloom scenarios and discussions affect you. Just stay as positive as possible. Think, imagine the kind of world that you want to create. This is a once in a lifetime, I think, experience. Never has there been a global disaster like we've had this time. And so it's really something that's very unique, and it's an opportunity to change the world. And I think if we want to change the world in the direction that many of us, I think most of us who are in this discussion room, in this Zoom room, want to see, we have to start believing that that's possible and start doing it ourselves at the individual level, and then spreading that out to the community and to the world. So it's not just a matter of accepting what's happening, but it's also taking action towards that better utopian future. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alan. So how, Hiran? So we
Thank
can
you.
basically, but after the situation, but I think to wind up this session, we expect few words from you.
Thank you. It was actually a great pleasure meeting both Dallen and Alan. I mean, I enjoyed listening to you, and it was quite educational as well, and Aslam and Hiran and everybody else. I've seen a lot of students who have registered, so that tells me that they have passion. I mean, you know, it's late in the evening in Sri Lanka, and you know, for all of them to have remained online for over 2 hours listening to us, I can see that there is passion. So along with your passion, you need to have patience. Tourism is not a quick fix. Tourism is not something where you're going to make quick money. There is no quick money in tourism and hospitality. You have to love this industry. If you get into this industry, you have to love this industry. You have that passion has to ooze out of you. The love for tourism, love for meeting people, love for being with people, love for the environment, all of that must be there. You have to ask yourself, do I have that in me? Do I enjoy smiling every day? Do I enjoy waking up in the morning and saying, thank God I'm alive, and thank God it's such a beautiful day? So if you are able to do that, tourism is an industry for you, and there is a future for us. I mean, you know, for most of you Sri Lankans who are listening to this, I have gone through terrible times in the past as well. 1987 to 89, probably Aslam will remember. The youngsters will not remember that period. 87 to 89, then back again in the early 2000 period. 2004 till about 2009 was a very, very rough period for all of us. We've come through all of that, and I'm sure we'll come through this period as well. So as both these gentlemen from the United States said, stay positive, you know, believe in what we are doing, and don't go in for quick fixes, have patience. You know, you will have a great future in our country, maybe somewhere else, who knows, that only time will tell, but enjoy being in tourism. Such a wonderful industry to be in. And God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Hiran and Dallen and Alan. Actually, I think, you know, facing struggle is the success of life. Achievers usually, you know, going through the struggles, never in a comfort zone. So Sri Lanka is also one of the country, all our history says, one after another, we go through the struggles and win the struggles. So as he says, you know, the no barriers stones in the river is not beautiful. So facing challenges is the beauty of the life. So therefore, with your, you know, concluding remarks, I wanted to thank Professor Dallen Timothy, Professor A Lew, and Mr. Hiran Cooray for your wonderful, valuable contribution for this webinar to, you know, to anticipate, to, you know, you know, make it success, our commitment toward the nation and the globe. Thank you very much, Hiran.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much once again for Professor Dallen Timothy and Mr. Hiran Cooray, as well as Professor A Lew, for sharing your valuable knowledge as well as the experience with us. So I would like to thank Professor Aslam as well for coordinating these three valuable people on behalf of the Department of Tourism Management. So I would like to thank Professor Aslam as well. So in my end, on behalf of the Department of Tourism Management as well as the Faculty of Management Studies, especially on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies, Professor Atulasi Nyanapal, as well as he is the Acting Vice Chancellor of the University, and on behalf of the Head of the Department of Tourism Management, Dr. Rangana Shalikar, I would like to thank my sincere, heartfelt gratitude to all of four resource persons at the moment here for sharing and facilitating for this valuable discussion show. Thank you very much, and hope you all will be taking the hands with us, with our students and with our academia to develop and to contribute to the tourism industry as well as the contribute for the tourism education. So I think it is the time to wind up the session. So thank you very much once again. So very good night to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.